I'm Zoe Robertson, and this is my presentation on Hong Kong, the megacity, the Pearl of the Orient. And so, first thing, why is Hong Kong important? Because it makes up a substantial part of China's GDP, even though it's small, relatively in size and population. It is 9% of the total GDP. It is the financial hub of the East, if you will. It is currently the forefront of innovation when it comes to infrastructure, manufacturing, and culture, and it is where the future has started. It is a representation of how the world will be in the near future: dense, culturally diverse, and architecturally severe. And geography. It is a peninsula located on the southern tip of mainland China, at the mouth of the Pearl River Delta, making it ideal for trade between China and the rest of southeastern Asia and just the general Pacific. It is surrounded by barrier islands, which protect it from invaders, and monsoons, which are an issue there. And it is actively expanding because the government is draining more and more seabed to make more housing. And so here is Hong Kong. There is Hong Kong Island. That's the greater peninsula that's also known as Hong Kong. That's Kowloon, which is where China is taking the seabed back to make housing. It's also where the English originally landed and started colonizing. So history, pre-1997, it was conquered by the Qin dynasty of China in about 220 BC, which before that was independent, and after that it remained pretty independent. That's why it's culturally so different from the rest of mainland China, because it's always kind of been a different group of people. And the English first landed in 1841 during the First Opium War, where they wanted to rebalance trade between them, because previously it was just all silver flowing into China and nothing out, so it was uneven and was a deficit. And after that, they got them addicted on opium, so it balanced the trade. And while mainland China converted to communism during the Chinese Revolution, Greater Hong Kong stayed very capitalist in what is known as a special economic zone. So they had different tax rates and were a lot more welcoming to businesses and free speech in general. And because of this, many innovators went there during the revolution, which meant that their economy got a lot better because it was a brain drain on the rest of China that flowed into Hong Kong. And they were disproportionately skilled, educated, and wealthy. And then after 1997, because 1997 is where it transferred control from the English colonizers to the Chinese, not as much as colonizers. While Hong Kong is somewhat autonomous today, the politics of the region are strictly controlled by China. It's just going to continue to get worse, because from 1997, 50 years after that, it would transfer to complete control of China, and right now it's in a kind of in-between place. Since the politics are so strictly controlled, the citizens of the region do not like it, and there are lots of protests going on about extradition and just general autonomy for Hong Kong that they want but don't have. And economics. It was originally a trade harbor that went between, it was a valuable port between mainland China and the outside world. And Hong Kong actually means fragrant harbor in Cantonese, which is the most common language of Hong Kong. But now it's more of a financial hub, not so much trading. It quickly industrialized in the 1950s because of the influx of immigrants during the Chinese cultural and just general revolution. But now manufacturing's in decline just because it's not financially profitable anymore. And now it's financed in the service industry and a growing tech industry. And it is also an increasingly popular tourist destination for those who are traveling between Southeast Asia and mainland China. And as I mentioned before, it is a special economic zone. So there's easier tax rates and regulations. And it's under laissez-faire capitalism instead of Marxist communism, with little promotion or regulation of industry. And then the financial sectors thrive because of this and the free trade policy of China. And urban planning. Public transportation is railways, taxis, buses, minibuses, tramways, ferries, a lot of stuff. Not a lot of cars. Driving is kind of difficult, and about 95% of the population says that their main mode of transportation is public, not driving. And while water and power are generally very affordable, housing is not. It is the world's least affordable housing market, and it is not just the unwelcoming terrain because of how the island is, it's kind of rocky and hard to build on, but unfair land distribution because the wealthy have so much. And it's been a contributing factor to the Hong Kong protests. And here is one of the many buses that is a double-decker bus. And that is an illustration of the housing crisis because people have started living in cage apartments inside of larger apartments. So that's all that can be afforded. And then the demographics. It is overwhelmingly ethnically Han Chinese, with a small minority of Southeast Asians, similar to the makeup of Greater China and Japan, where it's very homogeneous. But there is a small white population of Canadians, Americans, and Australians. 80% have at least some college education, and because of the migrants from the revolution were disproportionately wealthy and educated, so were their children. Shocker. About 4% of the workers are foreign nationals, which is a very small amount, that is growing because of a lack of people that fill jobs in the service industry, and the average salary is about $70,000 a year, which is a little bit above American, but you would hope it would be a lot higher just because of how expensive housing is, but it's not, and that's part of the issue. And here is the ethnic composition. You can see how it's almost entirely Chinese, with a small number of people from Southeast Asia, and then even smaller white and other. And the architecture is very contemporary. It has to accommodate a very dense population, so building up instead of out, because it does have the 4th highest population density in the world. It has to accommodate the mountains and the Bay Area, because it has a lot of variance topographically. And you see a lot of interesting Chinese architecture and then juxtaposed with more traditional European architecture, and then just uber modern urban architecture. And here is an example of the super modern. This is a very expensive house, which takes up a lot of land. And then the Hong Kong Design Institute, which is another example of the uber modern architecture. And then you see, compared to all of that, you can see with the urban background, then you just have a nun complex, that's the traditional Han Chinese architecture. And then you can see how dense this apartment building is, because up instead of out, that's over 1,000 units. And then you see, compared to that, all of the super European architecture at the University of Hong Kong. And then the culture. Even before it was colonized by the English, it was a trading port, so it had a lot of contact with the outside world, compared with the rest of China. It was one of 3 ports that was able to trade with the outside world during the Qing Dynasty. It was most recently under British control instead of Chinese, so the culture is heavily influenced by the West. The Europeans formed schools that taught Christian and European ideals instead of the Chinese ones. And favorite sports are soccer, rugby, and cricket. All were adopted from the English. Cantonese is the most widely understood language, followed by English, compared to the Mandarin Chinese of the mainland. And the majority identify with no religion, and 2/3 of the population consider themselves citizens of Hong Kong before citizens of China, which just shows how they view themselves as separate from the mainland. And here is a cricket player, which, from the English. And here is Hong Kong Disneyland, which was adopted from the Americans. And even though it's in Hong Kong, if it didn't have the writing, you would think it were in California. And then here is the collaboration between Pizza Hut and IKEA, which made a meatball pizza that is only available in Hong Kong, which is not at all Chinese or Asian culture, but is only available there just because of how big of a hub it is in central of the modern world. So why visit Hong Kong? To see the syncretism between the architecture of the East and the West, between tradition and modernness, and to experience the blending of tradition, like with the architecture of Han Chinese and English cultures. Like if you want to visit Asia, but don't want to feel like you're really in Asia, you want some of it, but not all of it, go to Hong Kong. And you see the scenic Bay Area and the bustling city, so you see the wonders of nature and the urban areas, and you experience some of these while not feeling too far removed from home. Okay, done.